Who knew romance used to be so dangerous that a honeymoon could double as a survival trial? Back then, marriage didn't just test commitment. It tested whether you could outrun bad luck, wildlife, or your spouse's terrible planning. And it only gets worse from here. 1. Nothing says lifelong commitment quite like a groom kicking off his honeymoon by attempting to impress his new bride with a swan he clearly misidentified as friendly decor, only to discover that medieval swans operated with the same energy as unpaid nightclub bouncers. This man strutted across the lakeside garden like he was announcing his entrance in a musical, extended a hand toward the bird, and learned instantly why nobles treated swans like semi-domesticated dragons. The bride screamed, the groom panicked, and the swan launched itself at him with the aerodynamic precision of a feathered missile fueled by pure hate. Witnesses said the thing chased him across the entire estate, honking like a vengeful trumpet until he dove into a hedge. The marriage survived, but every painting commissioned afterward mysteriously features the bride alone, presumably because the groom refused to share space with any creature possessing a neck longer than his ego. 2. A honeymoon carriage ride went off the rails, literally, when a wealthy merchant insisted on taking the scenic route, a phrase that in the 18th century translated directly to, "I have absolutely no idea where I'm going, but I will lie confidently about it." The couple ended up on a mountain path used exclusively by shepherds and goats, two demographics far better equipped for survival than a groom dressed like an embroidered teapot. The horse refused to continue, the wheels jammed, and a sudden storm convinced the bride the universe was staging an intervention. A shepherd eventually found them, staring blankly into the fog like two mannequins contemplating mortality, and guided them back with the same look one uses when rescuing tourists who ignore trail signs. The merchant later claimed it had all been a test of courage, though every insider report suggests the only courage present was the bride resisting the urge to annul the marriage then and there. 3. A surprisingly enthusiastic poet decided to start his honeymoon by reciting an original epic to his bride while strolling along a seaside cliff, apparently unaware that the combination of strong winds, bad footwear, and emotional overcommitment is basically nature's way of requesting slapstick comedy. He got 3 stanzas in before a gust shoved him sideways, sending him pinballing into a patch of brambles with all the grace of a falling wardrobe. The bride rushed over, only to find him clinging to a root system and insisting, between wheezes, that this was simply part of the performance, a metaphor about love's perilous journey. Local fishermen later reported seeing the couple trudging back toward town, the bride looking like someone questioning every decision that led her here, and the poet covered in scratches he tried describing as passionate punctuation marks. If love is blind, this particular marriage somehow managed to be blind, deaf, and slightly concussed within the first afternoon. 4. A groom who fancied himself a culinary visionary planned a romantic honeymoon dinner by insisting he could cook like the palace chefs, despite never having produced anything more complex than burnt porridge. He commandeered the inn's kitchen, declared himself a genius of flavor, and proceeded to construct a dish so bizarre it later circulated through the region as a cautionary tale. He combined fish, honey, cloves, and an alarming quantity of saffron because it looked expensive, producing a smell that made the innkeeper consider evacuating the building. The bride tried to be polite, took one bite, and immediately achieved the rare marital milestone of regretting her vows while still technically chewing. The dish was abandoned, the groom sulked, and the kitchen staff reportedly laughed so hard they had to sit down. Historians agree the honeymoon recovered, though only because the inn banned him from cooking ever again, thereby preventing additional culinary crimes. 5. A newlywed nobleman decided that nothing symbolized devotion better than a surprise nighttime boat ride on a lake he had not personally verified existed outside of local rumor. He dragged his bewildered bride through the dark countryside until they reached what turned out not to be a lake at all, but a shallow marsh inhabited by extremely territorial geese with the personalities of veteran soldiers. The couple climbed into a small rowboat anyway, because love makes people reckless, and promptly sank halfway as the mud swallowed the vessel with quiet, patient confidence. The groom attempted to paddle, the bride questioned her life choices, and the geese assembled like a feathery militia preparing for war. They escaped only after abandoning the boat and wading back to land, soaked, muddy, and chased by hissing birds conducting what looked like a coordinated military operation. No one ever mentions this disaster in the couple's official portraits, though the haunted look in their eyes says plenty. 6. A Renaissance scholar attempted to impress his bride by giving a passionate lecture on classical mythology during their honeymoon stroll, only to be interrupted by a farm donkey that mistook his flowing robes for food. The animal latched on with the determination of a tax collector and refused to release the fabric, dragging the scholar in slow, humiliating circles while he attempted to maintain dignity, a goal that disintegrated immediately when he face-planted into the dirt. The bride tried rescuing him, the donkey tried eating him, and a crowd gathered with the enthusiasm of villagers who had not seen entertainment in months. Eventually, a farmer freed him, though not before the donkey managed to remove half of his sleeve and all of his confidence. The bride reportedly laughed until she cried, a reaction that historians suspect set the tone for the rest of their marriage. She provided the joy, and he provided the material. 7. A honeymoon hunting trip spiraled into pure chaos when a groom attempted to impress his bride by demonstrating his legendary skill with a bow, despite owning a track record that suggested arrows feared him more than he controlled them. He took aim at a deer, missed by a heroic margin, and struck a beehive instead, triggering the kind of frantic chase usually reserved for slapstick cartoons. The bees erupted in a swirling cloud of righteous fury. The groom sprinted across the meadow screaming, and the bride, who had warned him repeatedly not to show off, watched with the calm resignation of someone witnessing destiny unfold in real time. They dove into a stream for safety, while the bees hovered overhead like disappointed mentors. Legend says the couple stayed underwater long enough for the groom to reconsider every decision he'd ever made regarding archery, courage, and public performance. The bride later called the episode a refreshing reminder that confidence is not a superpower. 8. A devoted husband decided that the ultimate romantic gesture was arranging a surprise horse-drawn sleigh ride. Even though it wasn't winter, the horse hated surprises, and the road was made of mud that clung to wheels the way guilt clings to poor decisions. The sleigh sank instantly, the horse froze in protest, and the groom insisted everything was fine while sinking deeper into what could generously be described as earth-based quicksand. The bride climbed out with far more efficiency, leaving him behind as the sleigh tilted like a ship accepting its fate. A group of farmers finally helped extract both groom and vehicle, though not before everyone involved concluded that this marriage would involve frequent apologies and possibly a ban on spontaneous ideas. The sleigh was later found abandoned behind the inn, half-cleaned and fully humiliated, while the couple enjoyed the rest of their honeymoon using only transportation with wheels that touch reality. 9. A wealthy bride insisted on commemorating her honeymoon with an elaborate portrait painted on the beach at sunrise, unaware that paintings require stillness, and stillness requires not standing near a coastline famous for rogue waves. The artist begged her to move somewhere safer, but she refused, determined to capture the romantic essence of nature. Nature responded by sending a wall of water that flattened her hairstyle, drenched the groom, and carried the painter's stool into the Atlantic like a farewell gift. The artist salvaged what he could, which turned out to be a half-finished painting featuring a very elegant couple and an aggressively judgmental wave. The portrait became a local sensation, celebrated not for romance, but for perfectly capturing the moment the honeymoon optimism washed away. Literally. The couple kept the painting anyway, possibly as a reminder that art imitates life, and sometimes life imitates slapstick. 10. A medieval bride eager to demonstrate her adventurous spirit insisted on climbing a small mountain during her honeymoon, despite having footwear designed exclusively for ballroom dancing and no practical understanding of terrain beyond "up-seems fine." She slipped on a patch of loose gravel, grabbed the groom for support, and successfully pulled him down with the efficiency of gravity's most loyal employee. They slid halfway down the slope, collecting grass stains, bruises, and a newfound respect for friction. A shepherd eventually helped them to safety, expressing the exact expression of someone rescuing two decorative figurines that accidentally came to life. The bride tried to reframe the incident as character building, while the groom privately declared mountains banned from all future vacations. The only lasting evidence of their mountaineering attempt was a pair of shoes that never recovered from the experience, and an innkeeper who laughed about the story for years. 11. A groom obsessed with astronomy declared his honeymoon the perfect time to chart the heavens, dragging his new wife into a freezing meadow at midnight, armed only with a dim lantern, a star map older than the continent they were standing on, and an ego large enough to block actual constellations. He lectured her for nearly an hour before realizing he had miscalculated the date, season, and direction, and had instead been enthusiastically identifying a cluster of fireflies. The bride, choosing grace, complimented his passion while discreetly edging toward the warmth of the inn. He persisted until a passing farmer asked why they were staring intensely at insects performing a mating ritual. The humiliation was immediate and thorough, leaving the bride with a delightful story and the groom with a lifelong commitment to verifying his coordinates before speaking. The stars may be eternal, but his dignity suffered a total eclipse. 12. A bride determined to ride horses on her honeymoon insisted on selecting the spirited stallion at the stable, a term which in equestrian language translates loosely to enjoys chaos for breakfast. She mounted with impressive confidence and zero practical training, prompting the horse to bolt across the field with the enthusiasm of someone fleeing unpaid debts. The groom chased behind on a much calmer mare, shouting advice that dissolved instantly into the wind. The bride clung on, screaming a mixture of exhilaration and regret, until the horse stopped abruptly to investigate a patch of wildflowers, nearly catapulting her into a nearby fence. By the time they returned to the stable hands were pretending not to laugh. The groom was reconsidering his life choices, and the bride was loudly insisting she meant to do all of that. The horse, meanwhile, wandered off, wearing the satisfied expression of an employee who had successfully completed onboarding hell. 13. A newlywed baker attempted to surprise his bride with a honeymoon breakfast crafted with artistry, only to accidentally ignite the inn's kitchen after treating a wood-fired oven like a romantic metaphor instead of a literal fire hazard. He stuffed it with enough fuel to cremate a dragon, lit it proudly, and watched in horror as flames surged out, like the oven had been storing resentment for decades. The bride helped the innkeeper form a frantic bucket chain while the baker apologized 10 times per minute, a pace historians suggest he maintained for the next 3 months. The fire was contained, though not before scorching half the pastries and all of his credibility. The inn eventually renamed the incident the Breakfast Catastrophe, a title the baker never quite lived down. The marriage survived, but he was quietly encouraged to express affection with flowers, words, or literally anything that did not require combustion. 14. A honeymoon picnic turned catastrophic when a groom attempted to open a bottle of sparkling wine with a dagger, a technique he'd seen performed once at a festival by someone far more qualified and significantly less foolish. He swung wildly, shattered the neck of the bottle, and sent the cork rocketing into a nearby beehive like a diplomatic declaration of war. The bees responded as expected, with overwhelming force and zero interest in negotiations. The couple fled across the meadow, dropping food, dignity, and any romantic ambiance they'd hoped to preserve. The picnic basket was abandoned to nature, which probably enjoyed the leftovers more than the couple ever could have. They eventually barricaded themselves inside their carriage, while bees swarmed outside like tiny, furious creditors. Future anniversaries reportedly never involved picnics, daggers, or beverages under pressure. 15. A bride with an enthusiasm for the supernatural insisted on visiting a legendary wishing spring during her honeymoon, convinced it would bless their union with eternal harmony. What she didn't account for was the spring being located in the middle of a bog that treated visitors like optional sacrifices. She stepped confidently onto what she believed was solid ground, sank instantly to her ankles, and shrieked with enough volume to alert every bird within 3 miles. The groom attempted to rescue her, only to sink as well, proving teamwork is not always the solution. A nearby farmer, unfazed by yet another pair of newlyweds trapped in mud, hauled them out using a rope and the expression of someone who has witnessed seasonal stupidity for decades. The couple left covered in muck and questioning whether the spring granted wishes or simply collected them as payment. Either way, harmony began with a bath. 16. A groom determined to prove he was a man of nature began his honeymoon by attempting to forage breakfast in a forest he'd only ever seen illustrated on a wine bottle, which explains why he proudly returned to the cottage carrying a bundle of leaves that turned out to be the favorite snack of an exceptionally grumpy wild boar. The boar arrived moments later to reclaim its property with the single-minded intensity of a tax auditor, sending the groom sprinting across the clearing while the bride watched from the doorway wearing the universal expression of someone revising the definition of compatibility. The chase lasted long enough for the groom to reconsider every romantic gesture involving wildlife, and it ended only when he scrambled onto a fallen tree and clung there like an overdressed barnacle. The boar eventually wandered off, unimpressed, leaving behind a man who had discovered that living off the land is far less poetic when the land actively objects. 17. A bride who fancied herself a spiritual traveler dragged her new husband to a remote monastery famed for its silent retreats, blithely ignoring the fact that the husband had never been quiet for longer than a sneeze and treated silence like an act of violence. The monks attempted to guide the couple through their meditative routine until the groom's pent-up chatter erupted like a conversational volcano, producing a non-stop monologue about his childhood, his opinions on bread, and 3 unrelated anxieties he'd apparently been saving for a special occasion. The monks stood frozen as though contemplating the precise moment society had failed, and the bride tried signaling him to stop. But the man was on such a roll that even divine intervention would have needed a waiting list. By the time the retreat ended, the monastery discreetly updated its guest policies to include the phrase "no enthusiastic talkers," and the couple left with the distinct honor of being the only honeymooners ever politely exiled for excessive personality. 18. A newlywed noblewoman demanded a grand entrance at a coastal tavern by arriving on a rented, heroic warhorse, a creature described by the stablehand as dependable, though the stablehand's definition of dependable apparently included a horse whose only reliable behavior was panicking at anything taller than a loaf of bread. When the couple approached the tavern, a fluttering banner sent the horse into instant meltdown mode, launching forward, skidding sideways, and nearly introducing the bride to a very intimate relationship with a pile of fishing nets. The groom tried to intervene but only managed to get dragged several feet by the reins before releasing them with the urgency of someone evacuating a cursed object. The horse bolted into the surf, the bride collapsed into the sand with the grace of a tipped statue, and the tavern patrons applauded the spectacle with the enthusiasm of people who had not seen quality entertainment in weeks. Romance survived, though the horse was politely returned with a note strongly recommending future travel by foot. 19. A couple vacationing near an old Roman bath decided to recreate the ancient bathing experience, despite the groom possessing the swimming skills of furniture and the bride assuming warm water was guaranteed by historical nostalgia alone. They stepped into the massive stone pool, immediately discovering that ancient Romans apparently enjoyed temperatures normally reserved for beverage refrigeration. The groom slipped on the algae-slick steps, producing a splash large enough to baptize several innocent bystanders, while the bride attempted to haul him upright, using the sort of determination previously seen only in competitive tug-of-war. Their combined flailing alerted a bored attendant who informed them, with visible exhaustion, that the baths weren't heated because the hypocaust system had collapsed sometime around the fall of civilization, a detail that might have been useful before they reenacted maritime disaster training. The couple retreated shivering, questioning both Roman engineering and their own decision-making timeline, though not necessarily in that order. 20. A groom with theatrical aspirations attempted to serenade his bride from beneath her balcony at an inn, apparently forgetting that historical architecture rarely accounts for acoustics, gravity, or the performer's complete lack of musical talent. He began his ballad with a dramatic flourish that startled the pigeons roosting above, causing them to launch into the air and rain down a level of avian commentary far more honest than any professional critic. The bride opened her window just in time to witness her husband dodging feathers, debris, and whatever else pigeons contribute to public spaces, all while valiantly maintaining his melody in a key that defied music theory. The innkeeper emerged, broom in hand, not to defend romance, but to defend his property from interpretive singing. The performance concluded with the groom fleeing indoors, voice cracking from exertion, and dignity crumpled like sheet music caught in a storm. The bride, to her credit, applauded, just quietly enough not to encourage a second attempt. 21. A couple visiting a countryside fair decided to enter a friendly archery contest, which is an optimistic description for any activity involving sharpened projectiles and amateur enthusiasm. The bride took her shot with surprising steadiness, hitting a respectable portion of the target, which inspired the groom to attempt a feat of dramatic flair he had absolutely no business attempting. Firing his arrow while turning in a flourish he'd clearly seen performed by someone far more qualified, probably in a painting. The arrow veered off course with the confidence of a tax form filled out incorrectly, slicing through a vendor's apple display and narrowly missing a goat that took personal offense. The fairgoers gasped, the vendor demanded compensation, and the goat marched forward with the posture of someone prepared to settle the matter physically. The couple paid their fine, fled the fair, and agreed that marital harmony required abandoning all sports that depend on rotational physics. 22. A groom certain he had mastered the art of diplomacy attempted to negotiate a room upgrade at a mountain inn by flattering the innkeeper, which worked beautifully right up until he complimented the innkeeper's hearty farmer physique, a phrase that instantly transformed the atmosphere from polite hospitality to pre-conflict negotiation. The bride attempted to clarify, but the innkeeper had already taken offense and announced that the only available room now was located above the stables, where the primary nighttime soundtrack consisted of livestock expressing vivid emotional opinions. The couple spent the evening listening to rhythmic thumping, sporadic bleating, and one rooster who apparently believed night was an optional social construct. By morning, the groom accepted that flattery is a delicate science best practiced with actual skill, and the innkeeper accepted an apology delivered with the sincerity of a man who had slept exactly 9 minutes. The marriage survived intact. The rooster, unfortunately, did not earn forgiveness. 23. A couple journeyed to a famous vineyard known for romantic tours, a phrase that concealed the crucial detail that the vineyard's terrain was essentially a tilted obstacle course disguised with grapevines. The groom, thrilled by the promise of free samples, overestimated his balance and underestimated both gravity and sloping ground. After 2 tastings, his stability declined to interpretive dance levels, and he attempted to stroll arm in arm with his bride, only to slip, cascade down the hillside, and take several vines with him, like a man reenacting a budget version of a legendary fall from myth. The vineyard staff watched with weary resignation as he tumbled to a stop in a pile of soil and pride, while the bride navigated downhill with the precision of someone who planned never to talk about this again. The groom emerged coated in grape skins and apologies, and the vineyard politely suggested the couple continue the tour on flat terrain only. 24. A bride hoping to impress her husband with her equestrian grace decided to demonstrate her expert mounting technique, a term she had learned from a book apparently written for people gifted with coordination rather than optimism. As she swung herself onto the saddle, her skirt became entangled. The horse shifted with the impatience of a creature late for lunch, and she performed an involuntary half somersault that left her draped across the animal like a decorative rug. The groom attempted to help, but the horse interpreted his approach as an invitation to wander toward a patch of thistles, forcing the bride to reposition herself while pretending the entire scenario was planned. A stable boy eventually untangled her with the calm professionalism of someone who had seen everything twice. The couple rode off slowly afterward, maintaining an unspoken agreement never to reference the acrobatic incident again, especially in front of witnesses. 25. A couple embarking on a romantic canoe ride discovered quickly that romance is incompatible with a vessel designed to punish imbalance. The groom climbed aboard with the finesse of a man stepping onto a floating dinner plate, causing the canoe to wobble like a toddler learning physics. The bride attempted to steady it, only to trigger a perfect combination of panic and miscoordination that sent both of them backward into the water with a synchronized splash, impressive enough to qualify as a competition dive. The canoe drifted off, relieved of responsibility, while the couple floundered toward shore, weighed down by soaked clothing and the crushing realization that they clearly lacked canoe compatibility. By the time they retrieved the vessel downstream, they agreed that future adventures would involve structures unaffected by weight distribution, such as park benches or chairs nailed to the floor. But on 26, a groom decided that the perfect honeymoon activity was falconry, apparently unaware that birds of prey treat humans as temporary furniture and respond only to individuals they respect, which did not include a man wearing a hat shaped suspiciously like prey. When the falcon was released, it surveyed the groom with mild contempt before landing squarely on his shoulder, gripping with a level of enthusiasm reserved for tree bark. The groom attempted to remain dignified, which proved difficult when the falcon adjusted its stance by digging its talons deeper, causing him to squeak in a pitch previously unknown to human vocal cords. The falconer intervened. The bride tried not to laugh, and the groom removed his hat with the ceremonial weight of someone retiring from an occupation after 6 catastrophic minutes. The falcon, meanwhile, looked thoroughly entertained, having successfully terrorized yet another overly confident novice. 27. A bride announced she intended to sketch the picturesque landscape surrounding their honeymoon chalet, unaware that art supplies and strong alpine winds collaborate poorly. She set up her easel, delicately positioned her paper and began drawing just as a gust tore the sketch from her board and launched it skyward. She lunged after it, the groom lunged after her, and together they formed a two-person kite dragged several feet across the meadow, while local goats observed with judgmental stoicism. The paper eventually sailed into a creek, where it transformed from in-progress masterpiece into abstract commentary on water damage. The bride salvaged the soggy remains, declared it symbolic, and the couple returned indoors to paint slightly less aerodynamic subjects, such as furniture. Outside, the goats resumed their grazing with the confidence of creatures who never attempt hobbies they cannot physically hold down. 28. A couple touring ancient ruins decided to explore an off-limits corridor, just for a peek, a choice historically linked to regret, trapped explorers, and at least one haunting. The tunnel narrowed, darkened, and revealed a colony of bats that reacted to their presence by launching into the air with the coordinated energy of a Gothic marching band. The groom screamed, the bride ducked, and the bats spiraled around them in a flurry of wings expressing unmistakable annoyance. They stumbled back into the daylight, hair disheveled, clothing askew, and dignity entirely optional. A guide who witnessed their exit offered the gentle observation that off-limits areas are labeled that way for reasons beyond mere decoration. The couple nodded silently, now fully educated on the consequences of unsolicited spelunking. The bats returned to their roost, satisfied with the efficiency of their eviction policy. 29. A groom convinced he could easily row a small fishing boat out to a scenic cove began paddling with the chaotic rhythm of someone mixing batter rather than navigating water. The tide took control almost immediately, pulling the couple sideways toward a patch of reeds where an irritable heron stood guard like a feathered sentinel. The bird flapped, shrieked, and delivered a stinging commentary on their maritime competence. The bride tried taking over, but the current insisted on maintaining authority, spinning them gently yet humiliatingly in circles. A fisherman eventually towed them back with the weary patience of a man who rescues tourists for sport. The groom, soaked and chastened, retired from rowing permanently, citing creative differences with the ocean. The heron, however, remained unimpressed for the remainder of the season. 30. A bride obsessed with floral symbolism insisted on picking wild blossoms to craft a honeymoon bouquet, blissfully unaware that she was wandering through a field beloved by bees with the same enthusiasm she reserved for wedding planning. She plucked a flower, shook loose a bee, and attempted to maintain composure while the groom suggested, incorrectly, that bees appreciate gentle conversation. Another blossom produced more bees, additional panic, and a hasty retreat that resembled a sprinting lesson taught by fear. The swarm pursued just long enough for the couple to realize nature keeps receipts. They escaped into a nearby barn, where they waited breathlessly as the bees hovered outside like winged debt collectors. The bouquet was abandoned, and future floral acquisitions took place entirely indoors. The bees returned to their flowers, comforted by the knowledge that humans, once again, had learned nothing. 31. A couple visiting a historic lighthouse decided to climb the narrow spiral staircase to admire the panoramic view, neglecting to consider that the staircase was designed for people who valued minimalism in both architecture and personal space. Halfway up, the groom's enthusiasm collided with his lack of spatial awareness, causing him to slip and send a chain reaction of motion that nearly toppled both newlyweds backward like decorative figurines placed on a slanted shelf. They clung to the railing while the echoes of their panic bounced elegantly through the lighthouse tower. At the top, the wind greeted them with the violent enthusiasm of an unpaid intern tasked with ventilation, nearly stealing the groom's hat and the bride's patience. They admired the view for approximately 12 seconds before mutually deciding the descent required full concentration and zero romance. They exited the lighthouse with shaky relief, and the building continued standing, having once again survived visitors who treated narrow staircases as casual suggestions rather than engineered tests of humility. And that's our grand tour of honeymoon chaos, proof that love survives almost anything except intelligence. Drop your pick for the dumbest disaster in the comments and brace yourself for whatever madness comes next.